Guys. Are we on? Yeah. I'm not going to do Schwarzenegger. Maybe afterwards. Come to the after party and I'll do Schwarzenegger for you. Or the after party. Yeah, that's right. Cool. It's been a long day. We've heard a lot of already pretty hot takes. So you should be accustomed to spice by now. I'm going to take it up a notch and give you something really, really hot. So, gems are overrated. They suck. You shouldn't use them. Let's go. Or not. Ah, yes. So, let's start with a story that we're all familiar with. You work on an app, and you got to add some new piece of functionality to it. Let's say it's pagination. So you're a responsible developer. What do? You Google or ask your friend the LLM, like, best Ruby gem pagination, and it spits something out. Probably something like Pagey. You look at the README, looks fine. You add it to your Gemfile, you add a couple of lines of code, you add like some code to your controller, add a bit of code to your views, and that's it, you're done. What the heck am I even talking about? Gems are great, right? This is awesome. Maybe I should have titled the talk like gems are underrated. Oh, we'll see. So that's not all we did, right? We didn't just add like 3 lines of code. We introduced a dependency, and what comes with dependencies? Well, hidden costs. We paid a so-called dependency tax. What does that mean? Well, from now on, you'll have to deal with Dependabot. You'll have to update your dependencies. You'll have to worry about them breaking and stuff. You'll have to worry about security. There's every other week now, there's a supply chain attack on NPM, and Ruby, well, so far we've been spared, but no longer, because this is from like 2 days ago, right? Large-scale supply chain attack on Ruby gems. Yeah, that's a risk that you take, and that's a risk we accept. There's also the thing called, oh, you can't read it, the transitive dependencies. It's Chris Oliver that writes, like, I track down a bug in a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. Fun, right? You have to deal with that. It's a risk. We accept it when we use gems. Also, gems aren't just code. Gem means accepting other people's the way other people do things. You're kind of at the mercy of maintainers. Maybe you want to change something about the gem, maybe you want to get a bug fix in, and they might let you, or they might just say, like, nah, like, I don't actually care, right? Yeah, that can happen to you. And also, dependencies rely on a shared infrastructure. In our case, there's Ruby gems, and I'm sorry to bring this up again, but there was a boo-boo like last year in autumn, maybe we remember that. Not the great look, but again, we accept that, right? Why do we still use gems? Well, because they're the best thing we have. They're the worst form of dependency management except all the others. Winston Churchill. I'm pretty sure he would have said that if he were using Ruby, were alive to use Ruby today, but we'll see. Thing is, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that today, there's actually a different way to do things, maybe even a different way to think about dependencies overall, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Who am I? I'm a crazy Austrian dude. Thanks for the intro before. I'm from Vienna, Austria. I am a Ruby freelancer since 2 years. I organized the Vienna RB Ruby meetup, so local Ruby group, and I'm also the co-organizer of RubyConf Austria, which, by the way, is taking place in 2 weeks and still has tickets for sale, so, you know, get some. Okay, that's enough. Let's go back to the regularly scheduled program. I said that when we use gems, we want to solve a problem, and I said that, well, gems are better than the alternative. What is the alternative, right? There's really 2 things. You accept somebody else's code, or you build your own thing, right? And that has always been the case. We can use what other people already did, use their knowledge, use their hard-earned lessons, use a dependency in our project, or we can build it ourselves. If we build it ourselves, well, that means we have to figure out the problem in detail, we have to figure out a good solution, a good architecture, whatever, and other people have already done this for us. So it's not really economical, right? It's about costs. Why do we not build things ourselves? Because gems are cheaper. We've seen this. It's like 3 lines of code. It takes 5 seconds. If I build it myself, it's gonna take a while. And then there's also running costs. So both gems and my own solution or custom-built solution have maintenance work to be done, right? You have to maybe fix a bug in a gem. Maybe you have to fix a bug in your own implementation. That's always the case. Sometimes it's more work, sometimes it's less work. That little orange spike there, that's the time that the Ruby gem did a major version upgrade and it changed all the interfaces and you had to hunt down every usage in your entire code base and change everything, and that took you a couple of days and pissed you off. But that's just, again, that's part of the deal. We use gems still because it's worth it. But let's take a step back again. Why do we use gems? I said I want to solve a problem. I want a feature, a thingy in my app that I can use. A gem doesn't solve one problem, it solves all the problems. That's the nature of a dependency, right? Different people come, they adopt some library or whatever, they come with their own issues, say, hey, could you add this? And naturally people do that. And that's fine, right? A dependency is there for many people to consume. But I don't want to solve, I don't want other people's problems solved. I want one problem solved, my problem, now. And in our example, I want just pagination. I just need offset-based pagination. I don't need a reusable abstraction for pagination that satisfies the entire ecosystem. So I'm not going to need it, right? And in this gap between what I actually need and what Gem does, because it needs to do everything for everybody, there's a gap. And that's a gap I'm interested in. There's something that we can optimize. And how are we going to do that? We're going to start copying. A little copying is better than a little dependency. Let's go, but we're still going to have edit. So, what are we going to do? We're going to keep dunking on poor Pagey. Not because I hate the gem. Actually, all the gems that I present here, I present because I really like them, and I've used them a lot. And still there? Yeah. Because I use them a lot, well, I know them, so they make good examples for this presentation. Pagey in particular, right? Who here uses Pagey, or has used Pagey? Oh, that's surprisingly few, actually. Okay. Pagey does like all the things you need pagination. It does offset-based pagination, what is it, cursor-based pagination. It has various front-end supports, like it supports Bulma, Bootstrap, Tailwind, whatever, yeah? Like I said, Jagni, I don't need it. What do I need? Some pagination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at what Pagey actually does, and I'm going to pick precisely the parts that I need. What does that look like? Here's the logic for offset-based pagination, ripped straight from Pagey. I'm not building anything from scratch here. Took. Well, okay. It's tired as well. We're all tired, so it's the tech, I think. This is ripped straight from Pagey and just removed all the configurability, the different use cases, all the concerns that aren't basically offset-based pagination, and cuts it out. And the result is amazingly simple, right? Get the number of results, divide by your page size, blah, 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 number of pages, and so on. That's like half the thing that we need already, right? What other half is missing? Well, the front-end part, right? Render something in the view, series nav, some links, blah, blah. That's like, what, 32 lines of code? Look, my point is not that Pagey is bolted or like that pagination is simple. It can be much more complicated than that, but that there's a huge gap between how much code do I need to implement, solve my problem, versus what Pagey solves. Anyone want to guess how many lines of code Pagey has? Let's do a show of hands. Like, who thinks it's less than 500? Okay, cool. 500 to 1,000? Okay, 1,000 to 2,000? 2,000 to 3,000? Still some takers, okay. More than 3,000? Well, okay, well, Call people, right? It's 2,835 lines of code versus our 32 lines. Why? Well, because it does a lot of stuff that I don't need. It itself has a bunch of releases, that means churn, right? It has transitive dependencies that we already talked about. I don't need all of that. I need my problem solved. And I can do it in very little code. Next example, Pundit. Who uses Pundit? Actually, one of my favorite gems is just plain old Ruby, and I think it's beautiful. It's authorization, right? Is a user allowed to do something? Is a user allowed to, in our case, update a post, right? Yes, if they are the author. You take a little concern, you include it in your controller, then you call the authorize method down there. And that tells you, is the user allowed to update your post? Super simple. How can we take the parts from Pagey that we need? How much is that? Well, let's start with the application policy, the base class. And this, I did not change a thing here. This is straight from Pundit, which speaks for the gem. Like, I had not to rip anything out, to just pull in the application policy. That's it. What other parts do we need? The authorize stuff, right? We need a concern to put in the controller to authorize. What is that? It's a glorified constantize. It's 3 lines of code. You look for a model, for the class of the model, look up the corresponding policy, initialize it with your user, public send on the... Am I going too much up and down with the voice? So, okay. And that tells you is the user authorized. In our case, use the action name update. How many lines of code is that? That's 30. 30 lines of code. And I've satisfied my use case. I've added authorization to my application without any gems. How many lines of code does Pundit have? It's 1,124. Yeah, it does a lot of stuff. It does namespacing, does some other funky stuff. I don't need all that. Just want authorization. I can fit that in 30 lines of code. Has some open issues. Has a lot of stars. Okay, our solution doesn't have stars because it's just a single file sitting in our project, right? You're the star. Last example, log rage is, I think, one of the first gems that I really fell in love with, I'm gonna say, because I'm a sucker for observability and I like clean, neat logs. And log rage does just that. You drop it in your Rails app, have like a couple of initial lines for the initializer, enable it basically, and you get single line log messages that are very human readable, right? How much code does it take to replicate that, pulled from log rage? It's more. It's a bit more complicated than the example we've seen, but that's Rails. Like, yeah, we create the log subscriber, blah, 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 controller, get the payload. You don't need to understand all that. We initialize a logger, blah, 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 and then we register it, and we're done. It's more, it's 51 lines of code, because it does a lot of like hooking into Rails internals and rec internals and so on. Still, right? Fun fact. I'm gonna get to that. You know what? I'm gonna get to that. How many lines of code? The whole log rage thing for a logger improvement to the formatting of the logging has 863 lines of code. It's not maintained anymore, really. What brings me to this part, this is not part of the original log rage gem. This fixes a bug starting in Rails 7.1, like a minor formatting issue that's pulled from an issue, yeah, not the actual gem. So there's another thing, like you want something fixed in your gem, maybe it's not going to happen, but you can always fix this. Why is it so many lines of code? Because it supports all the formatters. I don't care about JSON, whatever, gray log, whatever other formatters there are out there. I don't care. I want clean logging now. Let me reiterate what's my point here. It's not that gems are bloat. Okay, gems are by their nature, because they want to satisfy a lot of use cases, big. But you can easily create a very clean, simple, focused version of the functionality that you need from a gem out of the gem by copy-pasting, essentially, and learning a thing or two on the way, right? Because you need to understand what the gem actually does to boil all that functionality down to something clean that fits into a file. you get to own the code. You can always change it. You can, if you then suddenly need to add some new functionality, it's easily done because 32 lines of code in like a minute or so, easy peasy. And this sidesteps the dependency tags entirely. You don't get to deal with supply chain attacks, like you're the supply chain. You're the supply chain. There's nothing else. I want to take a moment to talk about forking and vendoring, because this isn't new. You could always take an existing gem and change it to fit your needs. But I'd argue this is slightly different, because when you're forking or you're vendoring, you take the gem as is, like this chunker, and you roll with that, right? This is not what we're doing. We're starting from scratch. We're taking what we are interested in a gem and just pulling that out, and that's all we do. And we end up with like a single file, a simple structure. We kind of extracted the essence that solves our problem from the gem using the knowledge from the gem. But even so, you might say, like, okay, Hans, you're just telling us, like, okay, read the source code of the gems that we're using, understand the gems. People have been saying this for years, like, read the freaking source and understand what you're actually using. I actually heard this today, I think, in one variant or the other. You should understand the code you're using, right? But we never did, because actually digging into your dependencies and understanding what to do, that takes time, and we're back to square one, right? To the graph of just using a gem is just cheaper, and understanding it and molding it is more expensive. So why the heck am I talking about this now, right? Why am I talking about this now? Well, because the cost of figuring out what a gem does, taking the parts that you're interested in, that you like, adapting them to your needs, extracting them, reshaping them to solve exactly your problem in your code base, has gone down a lot. Why? Yeah, we can't do a talk in 2026 without the friendly AI overloads. Fun fact, right? I give Gemini, create an image of a friendly AI overload, and it knows where I live. Like, that's the Donauturm, and there's a BIM from Vienna. It's kind of unsettling. Anyway, getting sidetracked. Our partnership yields prosperity. I like that part, because yes, it does. Like, all this process that I'm describing right now, that's a single prompt. Read the source code of this repo, of this gem that I like, copy the approach that the gem does that I like, yeah, to do something, pagination, whatever, boil that functionality down to a single file. That's all it is, and it works. I'll say this, right? Using AI eliminates a lot of the drudgery of dependencies too. You get automated dependency updates, that's much easier. Migrating to a new version of a gem, that's much easier, right? Changing all the APIs, whatever. But the other things, like having to deal with maintenance, having to deal with security issues, that's not solved. So that cost hasn't gone away. I'd argue that with this approach, there's like a very nice sweet spot in the cost-benefit curve, where you pay very little upfront, next to nothing, because yeah, it's a prompt. And also your maintenance is basically zero, because it is so small and self-contained that you can change it at any time with, yeah, basically zero cost. Does this apply to everything? I actually had a nice online exchange with Roman, who just had a talk. It was like, well, does this actually work or whatever? No, it doesn't work for every gem, obviously. Think of the cost-benefit curves. For some gems, you don't really care only about the code, you care about other things. You care about community, you care about security patches, right? You don't go copy-pasting bcrypt or whatever. You want security, you want to get updates when a new security issue is discovered, right? And you want to be able to pull that in. Also, this shit's complicated. Like, I wouldn't trust an AI to deal with my encryption and authorization, authentic, whatever, right? There's also the case where, like, if a gem is too large, if it's a framework, I'm using lots of parts, so the surface area is big, then it doesn't really fit in a single file, and that's where it starts breaking down. But with the gems that I presented, like little utility gems, that I can fit in less than 100 lines of code, yeah. I'd say rip them out. Rip them out of your Gemfile, get rid of them, replace them with like 30 lines of code adapted to your precise needs. That might sound a bit like, yeah, it's a hot take, right? It's supposed to draw criticism, and it did. I published a blog post a couple months ago, and I used a gem like Lucite Icons or Rails Icon Pack or something like that by a Rails designer who I really admired. That person does great blog posts. I learn a lot from them. Also puts out some great open source work, and they rightly, I think, criticized like, okay, copy-paste culture, right? Doing this could kill small open source projects, right? If everyone's just sitting there taking, and extracting and never giving back, then, yeah, that kills open source, and that's just sad. Right? And I get that. Thing is, for me, what is there to contribute? I'm not adding, I'm subtracting. I'm leaving out things to actually get rid of, again, the dependency tags, to be more efficient. What's my contribution? Am I going to open an issue or a PR that goes like, I really like your project, but I don't need 90% of it, so please delete it? Is that going to get merged? Nah. So what's the value of contributing that? On the other hand, though, and that's a good point, if there is something worth contributing, and if in your work you find something that adds value to the ecosystem, that's a new approach, yes, absolutely keep contributing that, because the ecosystem, Ruby gems, depend on that, right? If you find a real bug, new feature that might be valuable to other people, yeah, keep contributing. I don't think this changes like, or this kills or is a genuine threat to open source. Again, there's too many gems or too many utility, too many things that this approach doesn't apply to. But it does in some way change the role of open source. For me personally, I started to think of libraries, gems, like the name implies, more of like blueprints, right? Little references, ideas that I can reuse. I'm not pulling them in as dependency. I'm looking at a gem, I go like, that's a nice interface, that's clean, it solves my problem. I want this approach, and I want it as a single file in my project, right? Really, it's not that novel. It's like what open source people have been saying all along, like read the source. I'm doing that. I'm just doing it on steroids. Like, it's quicker, and I get to adapt things and rip stuff out easily to fit my needs. So let me close with this, right? I don't think this is like a threat to gems. This is not the end of Ruby gems. AI is not an end to dependencies. That's not it, right? If anything, approaches like this increase the value of good libraries, because good libraries now become like these nuggets of gold, right? In a sea of slop, where people have spent time to figure out a good architecture, a taste, right? A good implementation. And you can build on that knowledge and make it your own, right? Really, it just changes how we use gems, I think. Gems are no longer, will no longer be maybe just pure dependencies, but they'll become something between a dependency and like a living reference that you build on and that you copy-paste. That's it. Thank you so much. Get to the chopper. Okay.